I think Enzo Maresca is going to evolve this Chelsea team next season by sort of bringing in new fundamentals and new coaching details that we didn't see as much last season. We did a little bit, but it's something that makes the likes of PSG really stand out. And it's that sort of positional fluidity in the middle of the park. If we were to just put sort of a box around this area, it's how you can drag teams around using your sort of depth and height of the team. Now, to be able to do this, I think it is important, and I've been working on something which I hopefully will release out there for like a massive read sooner or later. But I've been working on something called midfield extension theory, which is basically the usage of fullbacks and how I think that fullbacks and midfielders are the most important profiles to have a mixture of them, to be able to sort of operate in lots of different ways in this middle of the park. So obviously for Chelsea, you've got Cucurella, you've got Reece James, you've got Gusto, you've got Acheampong, of course, as well. But as the midfielders, you've got Enzo, Santos, Caicedo, Asugo, Palmer, who can play as the 10, Lavia. You've got loads of different options. Look at PSG, for example. You have Vitinha, Ruiz, and Neves, who can all operate at deep sort of heights. They can operate in this sort of Santos role. They can also move into these half spaces. They can cover in these half space, like sort of defensive channels as well, if they need to. And they can all move around really well because they can operate in different zones. Same goes for the fullbacks. We have Nuno Mendes, who will predominantly offer that sort of left centre-back positioning on the ball, and then he can sort of drift up into these spaces. But again, for Portugal and even for PSG, he can operate in this half space. He can hold the width. He can even come inside and sort of tick things over in the midfield if he needs to. So you've got players that can operate at different heights is a key one, and different heights and depths and different zones. So how does this work for Chelsea? Now, last game, we sort of saw this 3-1-3, which again, it's a bit of a diamond, right? But as we did last season, the tip of the diamond, if it was to be a stereotypical diamond, would be Palmer higher than Gusto and Enzo. But instead, what you've got is that 3-1-3, which again, you've got the two wingers out wide. So it's more of a 3-1-6 overall with the centre forward as well. And you've got this solo pivot. Now, what this does is this is sort of your anchor. This is your base layer of sort of defence. You're always going to have that 3-1 base. Always when you're building up, you've got the two wide centre-backs, you've got the sort of Cole in the middle, and then you've got whoever you've got in the centre of the park. So your anchor in this sense is Santos. In another game, it could be Caicedo, for example. However, what you then get is the ability to create a +1. So having this 3-1 base can become a 3-2, but with different personnel dropping in. So if Enzo drops in here to create a 3-2, Palmer can drift over to this left side a little bit. Gusto can stay in there, and you're starting to shift the defense around because then somebody's got to follow Enzo into here. If that's the player that is on him on that sort of left-hand side, then like I say, Palmer's going to drift in and find that space behind where Enzo once was. So it's all about creating those little fluid movements. And this is why this season, I think we're going to see so much more of that from Enzo Maresca, because last season it was a little bit more rigid due to sort of trying to get the fundamental principles into this team. Same as it was for Luis Enrique at PSG in his first season. It was nowhere near as fluid. Again, a few of the players and profiles he had didn't help that. They've got a lot more hard-working players who are willing to track back and cover if they're caught on the ball. Because I think something that's really important is when you're going to be a bit more fluid with your movement, you can't just use the responsibilities on the ball. If Enzo drops into this sort of hole to get on the ball and the ball is lost, he then has the defensive responsibility of being in that double pivot. Same as Cole Palmer. If Cole Palmer's the one dropping in here alongside Santos to create a two-man pivot of Santos and Palmer, if that ball is lost, Palmer has to defend that has to be his role. He has to do the defensive part of that responsibility as well. If Palmer's dropped in and that ball's lost and Enzo and Gusto are pushed on, Palmer has to do his bit defensively to defend with that sort of rest defense of a 3-2, because otherwise there's nobody else there to do it. So that's what's extremely key about this, is not just the on-ball sort of responsibilities, but also the off-ball responsibilities. And again, like I say, this could be for anyone. So what you often see with PSG is Vitinha is usually that one sort of hovering as that number one in the middle, and he's the one sort of getting on the ball and making things tick. But if Neves does drop in, he does have the license to sort of spin in and go a little bit higher up. And you can see how that would work with Chelsea with, say, Enzo dropping in or Caicedo being there, and lots of different movements. Against Crystal Palace, there was points last season where we did it once, where Palmer was the one dropping in. And at times, people were moaning because it looked like Palmer was the solo pivot against Crystal Palace, and everybody hated it. But again, it gives you those sort of like little fluid rotations, and it creates space and openings elsewhere on the pitch. So that's something really important to keep an eye on when it comes to this. And like I say, this isn't just going to be like we always play a 3-1-3. If this is a 3-2, the idea would be the same. Within that 2, can you add a +1? Can Enzo drop in like he did last season to create a 3-3-4? Can you then have one of your other pivot players like Casado push a little bit higher? So you're still in a 3-2-5, but you almost swap the roles of the holding players and the pocket players. And it's these little movements that create sort of openings in the defence. And that's not just for midfielders, that's also for the fullbacks. So on this occasion, yes, Chalobah's not a fullback, he's playing as a right centre-back. But as you can see, he drives into that space, which is often opens up, especially against teams who press with 2 in the middle, because there's always going to be a free man. And usually if you can get the ball to that free man, the wide centre-back, they have space to drive into, as Chalobah does here, creating more of a 2-3 base. And again, with this, you've got Gusto pushed extremely high. You've got Palmer, who's ready to receive between the lines. And it almost allows, just again, to pull those players apart. Because if somebody's going to have to jump out to press a Chalobah, there's going to be space in here to exploit. And this actually leads to Cole Palmer receiving on the half turn, Galat making a clever dummy run, Palmer putting it in the back of the net, and Chelsea, happy days, go 1-0 up. So that's what I wanted to speak about in terms of how I think this system could work. Well, not even system, like I say, it's more about adding those more fluid principles into Chelsea's team. And this could work with so many different so many different levels of personnel, because you have your 1 in here, your 3 in here, but then you also have someone like Cucurella who can operate at so many different areas. He can operate in this number 10 area. He can operate inverted into the middle of the park. He can provide width if you need him to. He can provide sort of that left centre back, wide centre back role. The same goes for Reece James. He can operate in all these roles. So I do think that's something Maresca is trying to add. Players who can replace each other in zones, but also have the, as I said earlier, the defensive responsibility to carry out that role, which is why somebody like João Pedro could be key this season. Because as I said in the João Pedro video, where Nkunku and Felix maybe didn't have the same sort of buy-in to do the defensive part of the role, let's say Nkunku, which he actually did the other day, to give him his credit, Nkunku worked very hard in this game against against Palmeiras. He did work hard. But if he's caught in this area here and everybody else is pushed on, for example, I don't think Maresca trusted that you'd get the full sort of work rate from an Nkunku or Felix in this area when you're sort of, again, in that deep block of 5. Whereas João Pedro maybe would give you a little bit more of that. So I do think that's quite a big factor as to why João Pedro could have been brought in and why it could be sort of key. But what do you guys think of this sort of system, how it could work for Chelsea? Do you think that we're trying to bring in more players who can move across zones, even if they start in one position, they can move across zones and fulfill the responsibilities on ball and off ball of whichever zone they're in? Because I do think that's a huge, huge part of how Chelsea are trying to evolve this team and have a little bit more fluidity in their sort of rigid structure. So what do you guys think? Let me know